Hi, I'm David Burkett, convener of SNP Peterhead. The 8th of April was the 9th anniversary of the passing of a woman who, for many, will need no introduction. I am, of course, talking about the late Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. Usually, the Tories love to lionise their former leader, but this year they were remarkably quiet. Until the Young Conservative Network, a grassroots group for young Conservative Party members, popped up to remind us all about her legacy and her achievements. And those are being the first female Prime Minister and being the longest serving female Prime Minister. Now, Twitter is a restrictive medium. 280 characters doesn't give you a lot of scope, so I looked to see for the next tweet in the thread. After all, having been Prime Minister for 11 and a half years, there had to be more. Alas, there wasn't. So that was all they could say. First female and longest serving Prime Minister. Now, given that this is a network of young Conservatives, they may not know of her achievements, but they can be seen all around us today. So, young Conservative network, or anyone else who may be leaning towards the Tories, here's a selection just for you. There's no such thing as society, said Mrs. Thatcher in an interview in Woman's Own magazine in 1987. In saying that, she paved the way for the destruction of the social contract. The idea that fundamentally we're all responsible for making our society a good place where people are cared for and nurtured. When you wonder why we have food banks, why people accept the deaths of the poor and disabled at the hands of the Department of Work and Pensions, and why little children go to bed hungry and cold, you can thank Thatcher's legacy of destruction of the idea that we should all care. When she closed the coal mines and the steelworks, she destroyed entire towns' ways of life. In some places, the vast majority of families depended on those industries for their income. There was no plan to retrain workers, no mitigation of the impact, no just transition. Just destruction and poverty left in her wake. And despite creating these vast swathes of unemployment herself, she taught us to frame the unemployed as lazy and scroungers, instead of questioning why we allow people to suffer and be punished for their circumstances. If you've ever been treated cruelly because you're unemployed or disabled, it started with Thatcher. When she sold off our utilities and telecoms, she paved the way for private profiteering to be embedded in public services. Your energy bill high? Thatcher is at least partly culpable. This also led to continued privatisation and what we have now with our NHS in mortal danger. Publicise the losses, privatise the profits. Thatcher created that blueprint for privatising public assets. Run it into the ground. Defund it, make the service so ropey that no one values it anymore, then sell it off, reap the profits and laugh as the poor no longer have access to basic services. Section 28 was one of the cruelest pieces of legislation ever to come out of a British government, and we're still seeing the effects of it today. I went to school in the 80s and 90s. Many teachers still refuse to talk about LGBTQ issues as a result of Section 28. With the traumatisation of thousands of LGBTQ people, the hate, the violence and the tropes we still see used against them were crystallised into a malign machine of hate by Margaret Thatcher. The continued abuse of transgender people we see today is a legacy of this, and it uses the same appalling justifications. When she removed child nutritional programs, we called her the milk snatcher, but we wonder now why we allow young people to starve or suffer malnutrition in 2022. But it wasn't that long ago we were being primed to accept that some kids probably couldn't afford to eat decent meals. When she crushed the trade unions, many people rejoiced, but now you wonder why we have 0 hours contracts for fire and rehire, and why wage growth for average people falls behind the rate of inflation. If the cost of living is too damned high. That was Maggie Thatcher. Council houses. She sold off all the council houses and convinced us that this would make everyone rich. Now, this is the biggest con that's ever been perpetrated on working class people. They were told if they bought their house that they'd be richer and they'd be able to leave it to their kids. In practice, this enriched just a few wealthy folk, and it encouraged predatory landlordism that we see everywhere today. We now see house prices artificially inflated to the point where your kids can't afford to buy one. And now people not lucky enough to live in Scotland are being told to sell their home to pay for their care in old age. They were duped. We continue to see house prices rising as a good thing because it benefits those same wealthy rentiers. Old people pray their home will increase in value so they don't become destitute. Everybody loses except the super rich. Young folk fight for fairer housings, for measures to curb these rises. Old folks fear for their ability to eat because their pension is the lowest in the developed world. Who made them like that? Surely you can guess by now. The right to buy and the sell-off of our public property was the biggest asset strip ever perpetrated on a country, and we accepted it because we were being told it would make us richer and it would make our services better. So in a nutshell, her legacy was to make the UK poor, cruel, nasty and harsh and devoid of any love for each other. She pitted the poor against the poor and allowed the conditions for the wealthy to further enrich themselves off the backs of the destitute. She enabled the destruction of all the things that once made our communities nice places to be and replaced them with get-rich-quick schemes for the supposed elites. So now, here we are, poorer, sicker and sadder, with a UK government that took the schemes that Thatcher set up and run them to their logical conclusion. We have starving kids, freezing pensioners and dreadful quality of life for many of us. When COVID-19 hit, our government was more concerned with enriching their friends and throwing office parties than dealing with the pandemic. And that is the logical end point of no such thing as society. Initially, we hadn't planned to mark the 9th anniversary of her passing, but when misinformed young Conservatives pop up to remind us all how fantastic she was, we are duty bound to correct them. The reaction to her death 9 years ago was visceral. Yorkshire pit villages held street parties and parades. Effigies of her were burnt. The song Ding Dong the Witch is Dead reached number 2 in the single chart the week she died. And who can forget this reaction from a Glasgow pensioner?
London.
Don't you think she did any good?
Not a bit of good. Not a bit. I put a stake through her heart and garlic round her neck to make sure she never come back.
Isn't that a pretty horrible thing to say when her funeral's going on right now?
Too bad, too bad.
Some might say these reactions were extreme or even sick. They may be right. But do you believe that people, and in some cases entire communities, react like this for nothing? Now, we'd never be as crass as to celebrate the demise of a fellow human being, as people did love her. But as us ordinary folks are still seeing the legacy of Thatcher's cruelty and her worship of greed today. We saw it in the VIP fast-track lane for COVID PPE contracts that was so ably exploited by Tory donors as well as actual Tories like Baroness Michelle Moon. We see it in a billionaire chancellor taking 20 quid a week for universal credit whilst overseeing the very loopholes that allowed his wife to dodge millions in taxes. We see it in a Home Secretary who, despite being the daughter of immigrants, leads the cruelest and harshest Home Office in living memory. If you're fed up with this and you want to live in a country where everyone is safe, where everyone is fed, where everyone is warm and everyone can thrive, then we need to rediscover the idea of solidarity. That means you stop blaming the immigrant family next door for your problems, and that you stop seeing the disabled person who receives an independence payment as a faker and a scrounger. Turn your attention to the people who hoard everything, who have more money than they could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. Because for some inexplicable reason, our UK has a puzzling fondness for Thatcherite government. Even the areas decimated by her have recently given the Tories a chance. But there is another way. We see it in an SNP-led government that annually spends £600 million mitigating the cruel policies of the Tories at Westminster. We see it in a devolved government that puts itself forward as a super sponsor for Ukrainian refugees. And we saw it in our citizens, especially in Kenmure Street in Glasgow last year, when their solidarity, regardless of creed and colour, stood up to the cruel, hostile environment of the UK Home Office, protecting their neighbours and friends from a cruel and unnecessary deportation. All of this shows me there is a difference between our UK and Scotland, and we just need to go out and formalise it. And to the Young Conservative Network, I'd say this: choose your idols carefully. Past ones and current ones. Cheers, folks. Please share this video with anyone you like.